Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is useful human Arif Hassan. Arif, what the hell were the Rams doing at the end of that game?
I don't know. I am not a super big proponent of running the ball, as people who might listen to this podcast know. But why weren't they running the ball?
There were options. You could run the ball and spike it. You could run the ball and pretend to spike it. You had options. And the fact that you found yourself in a position where you went backwards 10 yards because you were a moron, like...
Yeah, it's incredible. Like, if they... Okay,
totally
so they
their fault.
If they pass like 3 times, then kick it, they probably make it, especially given how small the margin ended up being on the kick. So, like, I guess if they just don't take that dumb penalty, they're fine. But, like, honestly, they could have given themselves the latitude to not have that margin of error by advancing the ball on a run. Like, you get like 3 yards on 2 plays, then you spike it and you kick it. It's not complicated.
No, it's not. And the other thing that you see often is teams like going to the hash mark that they want to. Like,
right, yeah. I mean, they must have already been at the hash mark they wanted, I guess.
Yeah, so we're just going to throw it away and stop the clock twice. Idiots.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just yelling at the TV by the end of it. My fiance's like, I don't even understand football. Like, what is he doing? He's like, I can't explain what's happening on the TV either. Like, between that and the 2 circus catches we watched, one in the end zone and one for an interception. Just like, I get paid every once in a while to explain these games, and every once in a while I just get a head scratcher like this. Like, apparently I don't know football anymore. Between that and the Clay Matthews penalty, which why?
Yeah, that was nuts to me.
I'm not gonna sit here and defend Clay Matthews. All right, so moving on to the show. That was about as I feel like, and you saw Clay Matthews going to the locker room shortly after that. I feel like he may have retired on the field. Like if that's a penalty, then F this. I can't.
Right.
I'm gonna be like the corner in Buffalo who quit mid game.
And Devontae Davis, yeah.
Yeah, I'm out, dog. No more football for me. All right, well, welcome to tonight's episode of Norse Code. We will be going over the preview, rather, of the Giants game, which will be happening on Sunday. So that'll be coming up here in just a little bit. We also have a special guest that will be breaking down a little bit of the Giants game as well. So looking forward to that. But before we start, just want to thank you guys so much for listening, for helping out with the show, whether it's sharing links on social media, telling a friend, or donating to the show proper. We are still running our promotion. If you donate $3.50 a month via Patreon, as a new donor, you will be receiving free swag from us. I will be sending out the swag to the new donors here in just a couple days, so you guys can look forward to that, or at least me contacting you first about it. Again, $3.50 or more per month will get you free swag. We have random things that we've acquired. We've mentioned over the show. We have a couple of Josh Freeman Vikings cards for some reason. We've got a bunch of random Viking swag from away games, including the London game, the New York game, and stuff like that. We also have a Lego Christian Ponder. So if you want the Lego Christian Ponder, you might as well call it now, because it is burning a hole in the box that I am keeping it in. It is. Dusty gave that to me when I stayed with him last year during shortly before I slapped him, he gave it to me shortly before I ended up slapping him, and I was just staring at it like, I don't understand how we still have this. So we have random things of all sorts of joy. Plus, you'll get some behind the scenes stuff from Norse Code as well. So again, if you'd like, you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there, or you can go to paypal.me /Norse Code as well. New donor this episode is Blake, and Blake has a special question for Arif. Who on the Vikings is Daniel Jones going to hurdle?
I mean, by tradition, I think it's Anthony Barr. I mean, you just have to assume it's that and then wait for it to be proven wrong. I think that's the default.
And I don't even know if, because Jets fans and Giants fans are not, in the same circle. So it's not like it's going to be like a big, a huge cheer. Oh yeah, Anthony Barr should have signed with the Jets, blah, blah, blah. I think it's really just going to be the cheer of, wow, look at him clear that. That was impressive. Oh, and he landed and didn't tear his ACL. Awesome. Oh, he landed and didn't get mono. We're still one up on the Jets. Yeah. So again, thank you guys so much for listening, for helping out, whether it's financially or through promotion of the show. Again, really do appreciate it. All this stuff helps keep the show ad free, and that's important because you guys don't want ads. We don't want ads on the show. Again, really do appreciate it, and it helps with the live show stuff, which will be happening on November 29th. We will be taping a special edition of Norse Code from Petoskey's in Seattle, Washington. So if you find yourself in the area for the Seattle game, come on out to Petoskey's on November 29th. All of the pre-show stuff aside, do we really have to talk about this Diggs thing? Because I feel like we covered it last episode and nothing really changed other than he came to practice.
I mean, that presser, I think, is meaningful. Like the fact that he had that press conference, I think kind of reveals a lot more, right? So quick rundown of the things that he said. And it's actually a somewhat difficult to follow presser because he doesn't really want to talk. But, he comes out and he says the rumors are true, which is very annoying, right? Because there's multiple sets of rumors, one of which is that he demanded a trade. Another one is that, that the Vikings might be working out a trade with somebody or whatever. Another one is just, that the reason that he mispracticed is because he's frustrated. And another one is just the fact that he's frustrated, right? And so those are some of the rumors. And so he comes out and says, I missed practice because I was sick, but it is true that I'm frustrated. And while he's sniffling during the press conference and the temperature changed from 85 to 48. And so you could reasonably assume that someone would be sick. But also if you're sick, that gets listed on the NFL injury report. I mean, the Vikings have done it in the past with players who missed practice because they're ill. So, and it's just listed as illness on the injury report. So he didn't do that, right? And so I'm kind of suspicious of the idea that he missed practice entirely because he's sick. But he does say that he is frustrated with everything. He's very vague about what he's frustrated about, and he kind of talks around it. And so, he says that he's frustrated, and then he kind of puts it in this context of anytime you lose, you're frustrated, which is clearly not, the entire story. We want to get better, we want to win and stuff like that. But then later, he talks about how, I'm doing my job within the confines of what I'm being asked to do. And so if things aren't working, that's kind of on them, right? And so that, I think, kind of reveals a little bit about the nature of his frustration. And I think what comes across in this presser is that he is frustrated not just with Cousins, which I think is more supposition because he doesn't say that. It's a thing I believe based off of what I've seen, but also that he's frustrated with maybe potentially his role in the offense. And there's a couple of things that could mean, and I'll dive into that in a little bit. But then he was asked straight up, hey, have you demanded a trade? And he says no. He says he's had a lot of conversations with a lot of people. This is actually a funny sentence. I've had conversations with everybody, but I haven't communicated anything, which is hilarious, I think, as a sentence. What he means is that he hasn't communicated an intent or desire to be traded, which he then clarified in the follow-up sentence. But I just think that's a great sentence.
That sounds much more like a guy going to the bar and complaining to everybody at the bar instead of going home and fixing the situation that he has with his wife.
Well, yeah, I mean, in this case, having a discussion with his role in the offense, that might be fruitful, right? He's not demanded a trade, he says. But then to further complicate things, he, they were asked, has your agent demanded a trade? And he says, I don't know, you'd have to talk to him, which is if your agent is trying to trade you, you would know. That's a thing that they normally tell their clients. So that I found kind of interesting. So that kind of like keeps the spark of that rumor alive. But I think for the most part, he and people who represented have probably not demanded a trade, and he is frustrated with his role in the offense, and he's frustrated with the play of Kirk Cousins, and and so he doesn't show up to practice, I believe, for that reason and not for illness. My take on this is that it is kind of difficult to figure out. So I think that Diggs is being kind of emotional, and on the football machine, I talked about how there's probably a difference between a player who's kind of emotional, a little bit impulsive, wears their heart on the sleeve, and is very expressive about their emotions, and like a diva, right? Because I think when we think of diva, we think of receivers who intentionally harm the team in order to kind of preserve their own interests. And while I don't think that Diggs is necessarily helping the team too much, I don't actually think that he's hurting the team. When you miss practice, that doesn't help. That's fair. But I don't think that what he's doing is a means of attempting to blow the team up at his own behest. I don't think it's like a Terrell Owens type situation. I don't think it's like people are beginning to make comparisons to Antonio Brown. That's difficult. It's a little unfair, obviously, because Brown has like multiple sexual assault allegations against him. And then also I think there are some fair concerns about the state of his mental health. And that's just not a fair comparison to make. But if you want to compare him to before we thought those things about Brown back when he was in Pittsburgh, I don't know, maybe. I don't think that's the case, because I think Diggs is unlikely to cause the kind of locker room tension that Brown is. So I think that there's a difference here between somebody who's frustrated and has difficulty kind of containing that frustration versus, and I think a legitimate frustration. I think that's part of it too, versus somebody who just isn't getting the ball enough, but they're still winning, right? And I want to think about it from like the perspective of somebody in the same if you're Diggs, right? Like if you put yourself in his shoes, I'm not saying that you would do the same thing. Obviously, I think everybody kind of handles their own problems differently. But for like a year and 4 weeks now, or like 20 games, right? Your skill set is being utilized in a way. So you sign a contract that's great. Obviously, that's a lot of money. That's nice. But people have desires beyond money. And I think people like to be appreciated. I think people like to have their work rewarded. That's just a thing that's true about people. And I think that people forget that when they talk about like players, right? The only other type of motivation that people talk about is like winning. Like, oh, you should want to win. You shouldn't want money or whatever. But I think, just it's inherent that people like to be recognized for their work, and they like to, that recognition to be tangible, whether it's like on a stat sheet or whatever. Right. And so, he's clearly got a skill set where he's one of the top route runners in the league. I retweeted a Matt Harmon tweet where he provided evidence of that using his reception perception project, where he looks at the all 22 of every receiver over the course of like 8 games. And he, essentially figures out, what route they ran, what coverage they were against, and how often they're open. And Diggs is in the 98th percentile at getting open against man. And when you combine that with his zone coverage and his press coverage, which are both like in the 85th percentile, altogether there's not many receivers that are better in all 3. And so Harmon concludes that he's a top 3 route runner in the NFL, right? And we know that he has really great hands, despite that drop he had against Green Bay. We know because since 2017, he's had fewer drops than almost anybody. Not quite DeAndre Hopkins or Larry Fitzgerald level, but even better than Thielen, right? We know that he's got a better contested catch rate than Thielen. So we know that he can get open, and once the ball arrives, he can get the ball. So that places him fairly rare company in terms of how good of a receiver he is. And plus, he's good in the red zone despite his size. So we know that about him, and we also know that he is getting open. We know that that's continuing to happen. We saw that in Chicago, we saw that in Green Bay, and we saw that the ball's not getting to him. In his place, what do you do? And remember, it isn't one game. It's a season and a half. And, I think, the objection is, hey, but he had 1,000 yards for the first time ever. His most productive season was with Cousins. And, maybe that's fair. Like, I understand that. But I think from a yards per game perspective, he's had more productive pre-injury seasons, right? Or stretches of time. Before he gets injured, he averages 75 yards a game or something like that. And that was a little bit better than what, he was getting over the course of, some stretches of time with Cousins. But not only that, they threw the ball a lot more. So obviously he was just much more likely to get yards. I mean, they threw the ball the second most in the NFL. So, he should just have more yards, but on a per route basis, he should be getting kind of more production for the ability he has to get open. And so how do you express this frustration that's been building up for over a year? To have another meet? Because maybe it's unfair to presume that he already had these discussions with coaches and the quarterback. But let's assume, if we assume that he did, I don't know what the next step is. Maybe it's not that. It's probably not that. It's probably not holding out, and it's probably not walking out of the locker room and refusing to talk to media when they show up and stuff like that. But I mean, it's really difficult to figure out what the resolution of this is if they continue to insist on promoting a quarterback that can't get you the ball and designing routes and route concepts that don't take advantage of your skill set in the best way. And then that brings me to, I think, the role in the offense kind of portion of the discussion. So for the first half of the season, and this ended up, getting let up on by the end of the season, even before Stefanski took over as the interim offensive coordinator, he was very much playing kind of this Jarvis Landry role, right? Where he would really only get these underneath receptions, and he would really only get, slants or curls or whatever, and he wouldn't get opportunities at the intermediate or deep level of the field, which we know that he's been good at in the past. Fast forward to this year, he's running routes at kind of a typical depth, in fact, even a deeper depth than he's ever done before. But this is actually a really good way to clarify. Laquan Treadwell, on average, I asked the PFF guys this, Laquan Treadwell, on average, ran deeper routes than Stephon Diggs did last year. Just not even on routes targeted, just routes. That's insane. That's a crazy misuse of his skills. And Diggs ran the shortest route depth of any receiver on the roster last year. So this year, he's running deeper route depths, much deeper route depths. But I think his role on the offense is primarily as an alert, which is to say that he's not really in the progression unless the defense shows a funny look, does something wrong, or gives just the most favorable coverage ever. So the way alerts work, and you don't see this on every play. You don't even see it on most plays, depending on the offense. But the way alerts work is that you've got your primary route concept on one side. Say you've got, two receivers and a running back, or a receiver, tight end, and a running back, and they're all running routes on that side of the field. And you throw one route if it's man, and you throw these other routes based on a progression, right? If it's zone or something, right? So you go 1, 2, 3. One's not open, throw to 2, 2's not open, throw to 3. If that's not open, throw a check down. On the back side, so on the other side, but it's called the back side of the play, you've got an alert route, typically a post or a go, but it can be anything, right? And that's, hey, we see single coverage. Hey, we see single high coverage within man. Hey, they're overloading the side of the field with, say, banjo coverage against bunch, which is to say a box zone, which is a 4-player zone against 3 players, typically used to defend bunch. Hey, there's some alert, right? We see something here that should give our player on the other side of the field a unique opportunity. That's when you go to that player. But that means that player is not really in the progression. And you see this a lot more in college than the NFL, but you will see it in the NFL, where you've got an alert on the backside and they're the lone receiver on that side of the field. Well, if your quarterback is not going to the alert for whatever reason, you're just not getting the ball. So that could be it, because I do see that he is often a singled up receiver on one side of the field, which he did last year too. I think that one of the interesting discussions about Diggs versus Thielen, which I think is obviously a more playful discussion than it is anything, but one of the reasons I think Diggs is a better receiver is because he often gets these more difficult route assignments where he's the alert, he's a single, he doesn't have the gravity of these other players running their routes to kind of move the geometry of the coverage away from him, and he still finds ways to get open, which is not to say Thielen is bad because these other route concepts help him get open, but he's phenomenal, right? But if that's his primary role, if that happens a lot for him and he doesn't end up in the progression, I would understand why he would be frustrated. I'm not saying that that's the case. I'm not saying I know for a fact that he's the alert. And I'm not saying I know for a fact that he's never the first in the progression. He might always be the first in progression. I don't know. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was related to something like that, or if the way the progressions are designed is that they typically do not go to him. There's a bunch of routes and plays that are called where you've got a man beater on one side and a zone beater on the other. So you don't even have an alert in the same way. You just have two sets of route concepts designed to go against two different types of defenses, and you just kind of pick one side based on what the defense does. So I'm not saying that that's, even the majority of the plays the Vikings run, but that could be the case. And if that's the case, I understand why he would be frustrated. He doesn't have to think he's the better receiver than Thielen for his objection about the role in the offense to have teeth, right? I don't think it's necessarily about the number of total targets. I think it's the context of those targets. So he ends up with 7 targets against Chicago. But he doesn't get them until like really late into the third quarter, the beginning of the fourth quarter. CJ Ham, and I've said this 8 million times, so people who listen to my other podcasts have already heard it, but CJ Ham out targeted both Diggs and Thielen combined until midway through the third quarter. And so Diggs didn't really get targets until it kind of didn't matter, and they were running their like clock drain offense with 7 minutes left, down 2, but really 3 scores. So, I don't think that those targets are like a fair representation. And I think, the other side of it is, Diggs hasn't made the most of his opportunities this year. He had that drop against Green Bay, that fumble against Chicago. But I think, and I'm not saying that he's right, but I think his response would probably be, give me more opportunities. And I think that that's probably fair. There's a difference between Laquan Treadwell screwing up his opportunities at the beginning of a season and Stephon Diggs screwing up his opportunities at the beginning of the season. Treadwell has given you no reason to trust him. He screwed up opportunities before. Diggs has some of the surest hands. This is his first wide receiver football since 2017. He has some of the surest hands in the NFL. So I would give him those opportunities. And I think the second part of that is that a lot of his opportunities are kind of fake, right? Because like Kirk has been inaccurate. Like, I don't know what Diggs' catch rate is, but I imagine it's like not that close to Kirk's, or it's pretty close to Kirk's accuracy rate minus that drop in Green Bay. Kirk just hasn't been throwing him accurate balls. So he's frustrated. I totally understand those frustrations. I think that him or Thielen could be the engine of the offense instead of Dalvin Cook. And I think the thing is, I don't think either of them, I don't think it's a Mike Wallace situation. Well, Mike Wallace, remember, before he came to Minnesota, he complained in Miami in a win they had against Cleveland because he wasn't getting the ball enough. It was a win. I don't think Diggs or Thielen are upset that they don't get the ball in these 28-0 or 28-12 blowouts against the Falcons and the Raiders. I think they're upset that in a game where you should be throwing the ball more because you're behind or it's close, they don't get it. So I think they're more frustrated that they don't have an opportunity to help the team win in ways that they know they can help the team win. And Thielen is frustrated too. Don't get it twisted. He's very clearly frustrated. He's responding to it and reacting to it in a different way. His interactions with the media are a lot more professional. I think that the way that he talked to the media immediately after the game demonstrated more of that frustration than it did that professionalism. And his recharacterization of his post-game comments, I think, are more damage control than they are like, oh, no, I was just saying generically you have to have a two-dimensional offense. You can't have a one-dimensional offense. I think that that's just true. I was just giving a generic answer, which is a phrase he used, right? I was giving a generic answer, which is kind of a funny thing to admit. But the way that he said that about how we have to throw the ball better. And he said, throw the ball. We don't have to have a better passing game. We have to execute in the passing game better. He said, we have to throw the ball better, right? Which I don't want to pick too much on word choice. I think it's more about kind of the way that he said it. The way that he said it was like frustrated with the way things were going. So Thielen is clearly frustrated too. And I think that Thielen knows exactly how frustrated Diggs is. And I think that's kind of leaking through too. And so, Yeah, I think that there's some combination of the way Stefanski's designing the offense. I think that that's less of a concern, and the way Kirk is executing the offense when it actually is on his shoulders that are driving these frustrations. But I don't think Diggs is demanding a trade, nor do I think there's any chance the Vikings trade him. Like, it's not a Percy Harvin situation where you get him off your cap. Percy Harvin throws weights at coaches and he yells at coaches on the sideline in ways that like make you worry about the coach's health. It's not a Percy Harvin situation, which, by the way, Master Tisfatian, former Vikings beat writer for the Star Tribune, just put out this really incredible interview with Percy Harvin.
Got a lot of traction on that too. Got a ton of traction. It's like over 1 million views in like 48 hours for him.
Yeah, I DM'd him like, Jesus, this blew up, dude. And he was like, yeah, I don't get it, but I've got more content. And I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, he just tweeted out a bonus clip about what he would say to Golden Tate. And then tomorrow, or today for most of you listening to it, he'll be tweeting out a clip about his time with the Vikings. So pay attention to that.
So the big thing that's been reported is that teams have inquired because of the rumors about Diggs not being happy in Minnesota, and what's been reported is that the Vikings have turned down all offers. So
yeah, they haven't even entertained like, could you throw in, or could you, a second is really not going to do it. I'm going to need a first and a second. Like, they haven't even given an absurd response yet. They've just said no.
Be like, every player technically has a price, but they are not willing to scan it. They're not interested. So
yeah, the Vikings famously do have a price that they're willing to give up for basically every player. So they will say unless it's the right price, but they're basically just saying no to everybody.
Yeah. So it is worth noting that the idiot who was spreading the rumor about New England was brought on he was brought on some radio show, and the moment that somebody asked him why he was the only person reporting this dumb rumor, that he immediately hung up. So I enjoyed that, like that little moment. I'm not calling it Schadenfreude, but I did enjoy that. So that's the Diggs thing. The only thing that really fixes this is winning. So hopefully this sort of thing can go away and we can focus on losing to better teams than the Giants for the rest of the year. So Arif did an interview earlier today with Giants beat writer Matt Lombardo, and we'll go to that right now.
All right, with me I've got Matt Lombardo, the Giants beat writer for NJ.com and the Star Ledger. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Arif. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, a lot of excitement, I think, with the New York Giants. Maybe not necessarily for the season, or hey, maybe for the season. I mean, Daniel Jones is 2-0. Is this a team that you think can really threaten in the NFC East, or is this a team that's looking to build on what they've done?
Yeah, Arif, I think it's really a combination of both. I think this is really a season about developing Daniel Jones, starting to build a winning culture around him, which has already taken foot ever since he's been in there the past two games. And I'm sure we'll talk about the biggest differences in the offense between him and Eli Manning. But I look at the NFC East right now, and I think it's really a two-team race between the Cowboys and the Eagles. But the qualifier here is the Eagles have been banged up. Carson Wentz has struggled, the last couple of weeks. They went into Lambeau and won, but against Atlanta and the next week against the Detroit Lions kind of struggled. The receivers struggled. But I think the Giants are in that next tier. I think they're a cut above Washington. And if Daniel Jones continues to play at the level that he's been playing at, and if Saquon Barkley can get healthy, in the next couple of weeks here, and if this defense continues to play at the level it has the last two games, then I think they could very much be in the mix for a wild card. But big picture here, it's all about developing Jones, and it's all about laying the groundwork for 2020 and beyond with a fairly young roster.
Sure. Well, Jones, I think, is the key talker. Let's talk about him in a second. I do want to talk a little bit about Saquon Barkley. You have an article up at NJ.com about how crazy fast he seems to be recovering from this high ankle sprain. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think crazy fast is the best way to describe it here, right? Because he injures his ankle in the first half of the game 2 weeks ago in Tampa Bay. He's on crutches afterwards in noticeable pain. And here you are 11 days later. He's on the practice field on Wednesday. And Thursday afternoon, he's running full speed. He's jumping on the ankle. He's cutting. And, he said afterwards, after practice, that, because of his freakish workouts that he does every day and how he conditions his body and everything he does to take care of himself, that kind of prevented this injury from being worse than it was. But still, this is an injury that for running backs, Arif, you're talking about a 6 to 8 week timetable to really get back to full speed. And the one risk here is that, especially for running backs, the risk is to re-injure it or re-aggravate the injury if you rush back too soon. But Saquon Barkley isn't your typical athlete. He's not your typical football player.
Right.
Seems to heal very quickly. He's a freak athlete like we've talked about, and it's really no secret. And his freshman year at Penn State back in 2015, he suffered a high ankle sprain in the same right ankle that he injured this year, and he only missed 2 weeks. And then he came back 2 weeks later against Ohio State in the horseshoe and ran for 194 yards. So you look at Saquon Barkley, we can't really view him through the typical lens of your typical NFL running back. I still think Sunday is a little bit optimistic. I think it would be falling into the category of rushing back. But again, you just never know with this guy. If he's 100%, are you really going to keep him off the field? Are you going to really tell him that he can't go? I'd be surprised if he plays Sunday, but I think the target for Barkley and the Giants is next Thursday in prime time on the road against the Patriots.
It's so interesting. I mean, you wouldn't ever compare Barkley to Adrian Peterson just because they're two completely different styles of backs. Barkley, obviously more multi-capable. Adrian Peterson, maybe a tougher pure runner. But, I mean, it feels like I can't help but draw this comparison because Peterson's recovery from injury is, like, famous, right? And so so I can't help but think of that. That's just so fascinating. So obviously, it's very unlikely. It's so weird not to say impossible, but it's very unlikely that Barkley won't play on Sunday. Wayne Gallman seemed like he had a big game. Is he a more than capable replacement?
Yeah, Rafe, he's a guy that came in, had over 100 all-purpose yards. He rushed for a touchdown, had a touchdown catch. So he's not going to give you the splashy, flashy highlights that are going to lead SportsCenter on Sunday night, but he's a very capable running back. He's multifaceted enough that you don't lose that element of the passing game running through the running back that's such a chief tenet of Pat Shurmur's offense. So I think that what Wayne Gallman did last Sunday was twofold. One, it showed the Giants that regardless of Saquon Barkley's recovery timetable, they didn't need to go out and sign Jay Ajayi as a free agent or bring in a LeGarrette Blount or somebody similar. And they also, on the flip side of that, don't need to rush Saquon Barkley back because Gallman showed that he's capable of carrying the load. Now, he did fumble, and I think that's a big concern because another really fascinating element of Saquon Barkley's game is that he didn't fumble once last year as a rookie, and he only fumbled one time so far this year against the Cowboys, and the Giants recovered that fumble. So he's never lost a fumble in his career. Gallman fumbled last Sunday, so I think that that's one of those areas where protecting the football is going to be key. But, Arif, when I look at this game, I think the way the Giants kind of dictate to Minnesota is it's got to be through the air. It's got to be through Evan Ingram, who's their leading receiver right now. They're getting Golden Tate back. Sterling Shepard seems to be firing on all cylinders, and barring some sort of miraculous comeback from Barkley, I think Gallman would be one facet of the game plan, but I think that they need to strike quickly against this Vikings defense and try to turn it into a shootout because I think that's the only way the Giants are equipped to win this game.
Sure, yeah, and I think that's kind of the best way to transition. I mean, you talked a little bit about holding on to the football. That also seems to be an issue with the rookie quarterback Daniel Jones. Obviously, not maybe like a long-term problem, but in the short term, could cause some issues. It looks like he had 3 fumbles in the past 3 games. Obviously, one of those in the Dallas game where he only had 4 dropbacks, but then also threw 2 interceptions against Washington. I feel like he threw another interception that was dropped as well.
Yep.
There's a lot of turnover potential with this guy, right?
Yeah, I think that's the case with a lot of young quarterbacks, but that was kind of a red flag for Jones coming out of Duke. So protecting the football needs to be a priority for him. I think there are a lot of things that Jones does well. You look at the mobility. There was a 3rd and 16 last week that he scrambled from Houdini-like escape from the pocket against Washington for a 23-yard gain. You saw on 4th and 5, brilliant play design against Tampa Bay where the receivers kind of spread out and the Red Sea parted of that Buccaneer defense, and on 4th and 5 to win the game, Jones rushed for a touchdown. So the mobility's there, the efficiency on 3rd down. They're much more efficient on 3rd down with Jones than they were with Manning the first 2 weeks, but they need to limit the turnovers. And I think that turnovers are an issue, but I think that you can mitigate some of that by what they've been able to do by prolonging drives and keeping their defense off the field. But yeah, anytime you turn the football over, it's obviously not a good thing, but I think the Giants are better equipped to overcome those turnovers and overcome those mistakes with Jones than they ever were with Eli Manning.
That's fair. I think 2 more questions about the offense before we switch tacks and talk about the defense real quick. But if you for one game you could choose between a league average quarterback, whoever you think that is, or Daniel Jones, who do you think is more likely to win the one game?
You know what? That's fascinating because what we've seen the last 2 weeks is Daniel Jones do everything he needed to do to win the game, including the game-winning score and a furious second-half comeback against Tampa Bay in his first start. I'm inclined to go Daniel Jones, but I think that if we're talking about going into Foxborough and winning on a Thursday night or going into Dallas and winning or going into Philadelphia and winning a division game, I think that might be a little bit different. But it's so tough. Are we talking average quarterback like an Andy Dalton, Joe Flacco type, or are we talking like a young up-and-coming quarterback like a Lamar Jackson type, or is it somewhere in the middle? What are we talking here with a replacement-level QB? Give me a guy. Give me a name. Give me a name. Is it Case Keenum? Is it Kirk Cousins? Is it Cousins? Is that who you're going at here, Arif? Because if it's Kirk Cousins of the last 2 weeks, I'm probably taking Daniel Jones.
Sure. All right. Shot in the dark. Let's go with Matt Ryan. Actually, he's been elite in the past. He feels like he's been average this year. Matt Ryan, including all the offensive struggles they've had, but also including the fact that he has the ability to perform.
Yeah, it's a toss-up, but I probably take Matt Ryan only because of the pedigree, and I know that part of that pedigree is blowing the 44-6 lead in the Super Bowl or whatever it was in the second half. I think that I would probably go Matt Ryan, but I don't think Daniel Jones is far off from that level. I'm pretty high on the kid. I think that he has the chance to, be a pretty dominant quarterback in this league, but I think that he just needs to show it before you can pick him over a guy like Ryan or one of those replacement level quarterbacks.
All right, on the offensive line, you got former Minnesota Viking Mike Remmers. You've got New England, cast-off free agent. I don't know what to call him, Nate Slaughter. You've got, I think, a guy that people were kind of excited about for a while, Kevin Zeitler. It looks like I don't think he practiced, so that's going to be an interesting question. Then Will Hernandez, and I think John Halapio at center. I don't know how to pronounce that name.
Halapio. Yep, Halapio.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, cool. I almost pronounced it like the fish, tilapia. But that offensive line, I think I expected a lot less of it going into the year than so far they've performed. How do you because this has been a constant problem for the Vikings. So the fact that there is a former Viking on it, I just think it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I think that if you look across the board, Mike Remmers might be their worst offensive lineman at this point. And that's not necessarily a knock on Mike Remmers because I think that he's played reasonably well. And certainly he's been an upgrade over Chad Wheeler and Eric Flowers, who lined up at that spot in the past. But this offensive line has gotten a lot better this year. I think Zeitler has been a key to that. Obviously, his shoulder injury that he suffered last week has him a little bit in doubt for Sunday's game. But Will Hernandez is quietly developing into one of the middle-of-the-road to better, above-average left guards in the league. Solder has been inconsistent, but Halapio has been a model of consistency in the middle. And he's a guy who fractured his ankle and tore his ACL on the same play last year in Week 2 against the Cowboys. And all offseason, you heard about from the general manager Dave Gettleman on down, reminding people, don't forget about Jalapeno. He's going to come back. Don't forget about Jalapeno. And so far, he's delivered. He's been steady in the middle. He's developed into a leader along that offensive line. And I think that as the Giants' offense in general has seen some improvement this year, especially now that you have the mobile aspect of Daniel Jones's game in there at quarterback, I think the offensive line deserves a pretty substantial amount of the credit for this offensive turnaround.
All right, let's talk about the defense real quick. I know you're a bit on a time crunch, but there's so many fascinating things to talk about. The Giants drafted in 2017 Dalvin Tomlinson, a nose tackle in my eyes. In 2018, B.J. Hill, a nose tackle in my eyes. And then Dexter Lawrence in 2019 in the first round, a nose tackle in my eyes, but they're kind of average when it looks like, in terms of run defense, you look at expected points and so on. And it doesn't feel like they generate much of a pass rush. I feel like that might be part of the reason. Is this a strategy that's working for them?
I'll go one step further for you, Arif. They had arguably, what would we say, a top 10 nose tackle in Damon Harrison on this roster last year, and they flipped him for a fifth-round pick to the Detroit Lions.
Before that, they got rid of Jonathan Hankins, didn't they?
They did, and the part of the Odell Beckham trade was acquiring the number 17 overall pick from the Cleveland Browns. And after trading away Damon Harrison, they took Dexter Lawrence, who's essentially a nose tackle. So this has been certainly a Dave Gettleman philosophy of, loving his quote-unquote hog mollies on both sides of the line of scrimmage. I think that Lawrence has a chance to develop into a decent player. He provides a pretty steady ability to get after the quarterback in an interior pass rush, which, you talk to Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers, the thing that drives them the most crazy is that interior rush, which Lawrence has the ability to do. But you're right. They really don't have much of a discernible pass rush, which has really created issues not only in the front seven and generating pressure, but it's made life miserable on the back end for a secondary that has taken their lumps over the first 4 games of the season. But I'll say this, one player to watch on Sunday, and who I believe is arguably the most dominant player on this defense right now, is Marcus Golden, the edge rusher they signed in the offseason. He's 2 years removed from a torn ACL with the Cardinals. High motor player, high effort player. He was the only defensive player to enter this season with double-digit sacks on the Giants roster, and he has, I believe, 4 sacks through 4 games. Even a play that jumps out to me is against Tampa Bay. Jameis Winston was kind of flushed in the pocket, moved up. Golden had been kind of rubbed off the back end of the pocket and didn't give up on the play. Provided steady backside, a really great backside pursuit, and brought Winston down for the sack from behind. So while the defensive line might not be getting a lot of pressure, I look at Marcus Golden as a guy who, if he continues to play at this level, he could be approaching double-digit sacks again this year, and that would certainly translate into a big payday from the Giants or someone else going into the offseason.
And then finally, before I let you go, let's talk about that secondary. You said they've been taking their lumps. They drafted first-round pick DeAndre Baker. I kind of liked him coming out of Georgia. I thought that was a little high for him, but it looks like I don't know. Maybe I was wrong to like him. He seems to be performing very poorly. I talked to my friend Chuck, who's a huge Georgia fan, currently working at the New York Daily News, and he says that Baker just doesn't really have the speed for man, the awareness for zone, or the quickness for press. It feels like he doesn't have a strength. Is this the biggest issue right now for the secondary?
Yeah, Arif, I think that's one of the issues. And by the way, I was on that same bandwagon. I might have been driving the DeAndre Baker bandwagon, to be honest with you. I had him as one of my top 2 corners in the class. I thought that he was, from a physicality standpoint, the type of guy that could go toe-to-toe with most wide receivers in the league. That just hasn't happened. I think the biggest issue with DeAndre Baker, it's twofold. Number one, he's more of a press man corner where he likes to get his hands up on guys at the line of scrimmage, rub them off their route a little bit and be disruptive at the start of the play. And they weren't doing that with him against the Cowboys when he went up against Amari Cooper or Michael Dunlap. They weren't really doing it either against the Buffalo Bills, and he kind of got exposed. But they've started to play more press man on that side of the field. And what I think has really helped him is, instead of having Janoris Jenkins travel with the best wide receiver, whether it was Cooper against the Cowboys or John Brown against against the Bills. We saw it go extremely poorly with Mike Evans receiving 190 yards and 3 touchdowns against Janoris Jenkins. What the Giants have done starting last week was they're no longer traveling Jenkins. They're sticking him on one side of the field and Baker on the other. And I think that's kind of allowed Baker to get his wits about him out there. He's not worried about who's lining up on what side. He's not worried about what the coverage is or what help he has over the top. I think it's simplified the back end of the scheme a little bit, and that's helped Baker. I mean, we'll see. He played noticeably better last week, but let's be real about this. Washington's offense doesn't have a lot of weapons, especially in the passing game without Terry McLaurin. So I think Sunday is going to be a big test. If Stephon Diggs is there and in the lineup and Adam Thielen is out there on the other side, this could become a shooting gallery for Kirk Cousins and the Vikings. So, I think that Baker, if they can have him play press man and have him stick with one side of the field, it's going to help him. But I still think that he's a guy that is still going to go through some growing pains as we go along here.
All right, so it looks like it'll be two offenses that into the year wanted to be run first, kind of want to air it out in this game against each other. We'll see how that works out. 5.5-point favorites the Vikings are going into MetLife Stadium. I lied. I have one more question. Who do you have versus the spread?
The number's 5.5. I have the Giants covering the number. I think it's closer than a lot of people might think it would be or expected it to be before the season. But listen, this is kind of the crucible of the Giants' schedule. They started out last week with the division game against Washington. You step up the competition level a bit against Minnesota, and then you go on the road Thursday night on 3 days rest to take on the New England Patriots. Listen, Arif, I think the biggest concern the Giants are going to have is what do they do against Dalvin Cook? You know better than anybody else. He's averaging 5.8 yards per carry, second in the league in rushing. He's a battering ram. And the Giants are banged up an inside linebacker. Tay Davis just coming out of the concussion protocol. Alec Ogletree has a hamstring injury he's trying to come back from. And Ryan Connolly, their fifth-round rookie, had been playing at a very high level, actually took Davis' starting job, and he tore his ACL last week. So you're looking at David Mayo or Nate Stupar potentially playing significant defensive snaps, which is bad news against any opponent. It could be a death knell against Dalvin Cook and the Vikings. So I think the Vikings want to grind this out. I think they want to control both lines of scrimmage, which they're more than capable of doing against this team. So I like the Giants to cover, but I think the Vikings win the game something in the area of 27-24.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Tell people where they can find you.
You got it, brother. You can follow me on Twitter at Matt Lombardo NFL, Instagram, same username. And of course, you can read me at nj.com/Giants.
All right, let's go into the mailbag here. The first question is from Luke Braun, who asks, real question, is Janoris Jenkins good?
I don't think so. So, like, the thing is, he's got a couple of turnovers this season, and we're like predisposed to think that the defensive backs with turnovers are good, which I think is a fair predisposition to have. So he's got 2 interceptions and a pass deflection, but like, near the end of his career, or even just the back half of his career, D'Angelo Hall was not good, and in fact was a liability. And I think that this is maybe a good kind of comparative case where Janoris Jenkins tends to gamble and loses those gambles a lot in order to get those picks. And when he misses, he just leaves a bunch of open field. And there's a couple of interesting ways to take a look at that. One is just to watch his game against Mike Evans. Like, he gave like 197 yards to Mike Evans. I mean, that's Mike Evans, who's got like a case to be the most underrated wide receiver in the NFL next to DeAndre Hopkins. Fine. But Janoris Jenkins is third in total yards allowed this year in the NFL. And maybe teams are like throwing it a lot, right? Like, maybe total yards is not a great way to take a look at it. Well, what's the average reception? Because if he's gambling, then he's allowing a lot of yards after catch. Well, the average reception is 15.6 yards per catch. And so that's 25th of 107 cornerbacks, right? And so that lends credence to the idea that he's gambling. Plus, he's got 5 missed tackles. Those tend to come on poor tackling angles, and so on. So the pass rating so he's allowed 3 touchdowns. The pass rating he's allowed is over 100. None of these statistics are like particularly perfect for evaluating cornerbacks. Like Trey Waynes, for example, is allowed a higher pass rating, but I think that he's played a lot better than Janoris Jenkins. Jalen Ramsey is allowed a higher passer rating, but I think these kind of demonstrate or back up what we're looking at on film when it comes to these cornerbacks. He's given up a ton of yards per like route defended, right? Which I think is like a much better statistic in terms of evaluating cornerbacks. The interesting thing to me, and we talked about this a little bit more in the interview with Matt Lombardo, is that DeAndre Baker is playing a lot worse than him. And like Lombardo mentioned, they stopped shadowing Janoris Jenkins. So that's kind of interesting. DeAndre Baker, by the way, second in the league in yards allowed per cover snap, second worst in the league. Fourth is Janoris Jenkins. So, no, he's bad. He just has a couple of picks. And did they both come against... they didn't both come against Washington, did they? Because then it doesn't even count. It's basically 0 picks. Yeah, they both came against Washington.
I mean, like in another, that's like saying how much you weigh, like on the moon. Like it doesn't actually count there. You played against Washington's offense. That doesn't matter. You came away with the same number of picks that everybody else came away with.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Garbage fire.
You played the moon.
Yeah. What a garbage fire that's turning into. Henry asks, I could look this up, but I'm lazy, so it's easier to tweet at you.
Fair. I get it.
Yeah. The names of all the positions make sense to me except offensive tackles. Why are offensive tackles not called edge guards or something? They're not allowed to tackle.
Well, ask TJ Clemming that. He tackled Petty a few times. Well, because they were named the same thing. So in the history of football, you go back, they were named, so fullbacks were on both sides of the ball. There were halfbacks on both sides of it. So they would call them defensive halfbacks, defensive fullbacks. And so on the other side of the field, you had nose guards. That was a thing. Nose tackles, defensive tackles. Defensive ends, and then you had offensive ends, which we now call tight ends, but they were offensive ends and split ends, right? So you had tight ends and split ends ended up becoming wide receivers, and wingbacks ended up becoming wide receivers too, but flankers, right? So the history of football, you had guards on both sides, you had tackles on both sides, and you had ends on both sides. And then the offensive terminology became a little bit more specific. You had split ends and tight ends and so on, and then flankers, and then those all got changed. And then on the defensive side, instead of linebackers, you had defensive fullbacks, and instead of cornerbacks, you had like defensive halfbacks. And like safeties, I think were called like defensive halfbacks or something like that. And those ended up getting changed to like linebacker, safety, cornerback, and so on. So that's just like kind of a remnant of football, is that you had tackles on both sides of the ball. And they were just named whatever they were named because the tackle box was important. And this one is apocryphal. I don't know if this one is 100% true, but the box was where the scrum occurred, or the scrimmage. Sometimes actually in rugby called the scrummage before they just called it the scrum. But the tackle box was important, and that's where you tackled, and the tackles define the tackle box on both sides of the ball. So that's kind of why. Interestingly, the names quarterback, halfback, fullback, there was a 5/8 back in some systems. That's hilarious. But you were named what you were named based on how far back from the line of scrimmage that you would line up, which obviously is no longer true, right? Because the halfback and the fullback and the quarterback, like they line up, I think, in the fullback doesn't line up behind the halfback. Like it doesn't make any sense. But yeah, that's where the position names come from.
So everyone got to learn something there, right?
Hopefully. They still call some nose tackles nose guards. I think that's weird.
It has been I have actually heard that phrase before, and I thought that was kind of odd, and I didn't actually know what that was coming from. Raul asks, NFL wins seem so fragile. If a penalty isn't called on the Trubisky fumble, I'm adding some inflection on this just because You just
it's not in the tweet? No way.
Yeah, the inflection isn't listed in the tweet. No, but if a tweet is going to include the word fragile, I'm gonna give it a dramatic reading. NFL wins seem so fragile. If a penalty isn't called on the Trubisky fumble, then we may have been riding high after a win. Compared to other professional sports, NFL games seem more influenced by chance occurrence rather than skill. Is this an accurate assessment?
So I remember seeing a study about this. So I saw this question, hit the feed, I looked it up, and it turns out, no. Sorry, you're wrong. The most stable sport in terms of team strength predicting a win, or wins predicting a win, which might even be a better way to look at it, because if wins are fragile, they do a very poor job of predicting future wins. The most stable sport is the NBA, which I don't think that surprises really anyone. But then after that, it's the NFL. And then there's a fair distance between the NFL and then the NHL and MLB. And a lot of people think of, baseball as this like very stable sport. We get to apply statistics to it, but individual baseball games have so much variance to them. And it's very difficult to predict an individual baseball game. But an individual NFL game is more stable than a lot of sports. It's just the NBA where you end up getting more stability. And it might just be because there's just a history of more extremes in terms of talent at the top and the bottom in the NBA. So there's that. And then the problem is not that a best of 7 series in baseball is really the best way to figure it out, given the inherent instability of baseball. But, the NFL doesn't have a series. Right. And so, you've got best of 5, best of 7 in baseball. You've got best of 3, best of 5 in basketball, or best of 5, best of 7 in basketball as well. And then I think you've got best of 5 in hockey. But you best of 1 in football. And so that kind of magnifies the idea that it's unstable. But over the course of a season, the MLB is much better. Over the course of an individual game, the NFL is actually much more stable. And it turns out that sometimes just teams are too close in talent and something small does swing it. But sometimes, the Ravens beat the Dolphins by 56 points.
It is a thing. And kind of odd when it happens too. Ian Pauly says, breaking away from the elephant in the room, where is the offensive line right now in regard to what you thought they would be at the quarter mark of the season performance-wise? How much reasonable room for improvement is possible going forward this year?
They're well below my expectations, and I was not necessarily an optimist on this offensive line. I was like, hey, if a couple things bounce their way, they'll be below average, and that'll be a huge improvement. That's fantastic. And they're not. They're pretty bad. I expected more from Bradbury. I even expected more from Elflein, and I was trying to say I don't think this move to guard is really going to do much for him, and I think he's a better center. And the thing is, he's playing his worst football ever at guard. He played better at center last year, injured, than Bradbury's playing this year. That's a problem. Josh Klein is playing well. Unfortunately, he didn't play last week, and he missed part of the week before. It looks like he'll be healthy for this game, so that's great. But he's playing all right, and Riley Reif is playing average to below average, and you're paying him to be a little bit better than that, but he's playing average to below average. He just is coming off of a bad game where he played Khalil Mack. But versus Khalil Mack, I'd say he had a below average performance, or worse than below average. But you have to adjust for the fact that he played Khalil Mack when you're thinking about projecting it going forward. Brown and Neal, of course, is playing pretty well. He didn't really come off having his best game, but he's playing really well. So how do I project it, or how much room is there for improvement? I think with Elflein, you're just kind of boned, and that's it. I think he's broken. He's not fixable. I'd love to be wrong, because I like it when players turn things around. Bradbury, I think he's already showing signs of improvement. He's coming off of a game where I think he dipped. So the Oakland game has been his best game so far, but it was also his easiest competition. So I would say, the way that he played against Chicago from a traits-based perspective, I think showed a lot more. I think that, he was a little bit quicker getting into his set. I think that he's doing a little bit better in terms of adjusting to bull rushes and stuff like that. So that is good, and I expect him to improve. But I don't think he'll be anything but a bad center by the end of the year. And bad would be an improvement because right now, and you don't even have to check out the PFF grades. I mean, they're really nice to have to provide context. But every week when I'm breaking down, an opponent, I'm looking at their film, I'm seeing a much better center, right? It's not that hard to find out the fact that Bradbury is playing as one of the worst centers in the NFL. So if he improves to bad, that's a good trajectory to be on. Maybe he'll be kind of good next year.
I know that I was laughing at that last episode as well, but it's rough.
It is.
Sam asks, if you haven't gotten too far into it, here's a question. Is this are these 2 losses that we normally take in any given season against stout division foes, or is this a team that just isn't good against good teams?
I don't know. I wish I knew the answer, but we only have 2 good division teams to test them against, right? I don't think the Giants are a particularly good team. Lombardo seems to think a little bit more of them, and he, of course, follows the team, so he would know more than I would. But, I don't think we'll know. Like, maybe when they play Kansas City, that'd be a hell of a time to find out. But, yeah, it doesn't seem like... It's difficult to, conceive of the type of team that just demolishes bad teams and gets crushed by good teams. Like, that kind of doesn't happen in the NFL. Like, if you crush bad teams more than once, like if you just destroy them, there's a really, really good chance that you're a good team and that you'll hold your own against good teams. That just historically that happens. Not all the time, obviously, but that usually happens. And so to see them get crushed by good teams, that's weird, man. So is it a division thing? Are they just going to play the extreme version of, not to their level, but the extreme version of what an average team would do against this team? I don't think so, but I just don't know. With the defense playing the way it is and the way that it played in both of those crushing losses, which, again, I mean, you can't just get rid of the 21 points Green Bay scored. That's part of who the defense is. But the way the defense played over the course of those games, I just feel like that part will level out the entire performance and that they won't continue to be crushed by good teams. And maybe that's too much optimism to say that the Vikings won't be crushed by good teams. But the fan base is in a serious state of pessimism right now. So I would say that it's unlikely they'll continue to get blown out because their games against bad teams are just as much information as their game against good teams.
Aaron asks, what does Kirk have to do in order to sucker the Vikings into another big contract after next season?
I don't think he could do. I think the only way he can do it is to Joe Flacco it, I guess. Sneak into the playoffs, rely on the Lions losing a week 17 game or something and just kind of backdoor your way in on a 9-7 record into the wild card. And then go crazy, right? Throw a 4th and 1 to CJ Ham, a 4th and 22 to CJ Ham, and he'll convert it, right?
Behold the power of CJ Ham.
Right. And just go wild in the playoffs and win a Super Bowl. And, if the Vikings saddle themselves with a $45 million contract, I think, Vikings fans would be like, all right, this is probably not a good idea, but we got a ring. We're fine.
We got a ring out of it. We'll survive. Probably.
Yeah, I'm going to remember this, in a haze 2 years from now. So
breaking news, Kirk Cousins signs extension after winning the Super Bowl. Kenneth Allen asks, do you think the Vikings will try a more balanced or pass heavier offense Sunday, regardless of their success on the ground? The reasoning is that they need to show themselves and the league that they can pass if needed, and when else except against one of the worst defenses in the NFL.
I mean, no. Well, okay, so if I'm the Giants, I'm probably putting a lot of attention on Diggs. Because one of two things happens. Either the Vikings are going to try to accommodate these frustrations and throw to him a lot, or they're not. And he's going to be frustrated on the field and maybe commit like an Odell Beckham penalty, right? Like when Josh Norman baited Odell Beckham into like punching him or whatever, that was pretty good for Washington. That helped them. So, maybe that, that's what I would do is I would gamble on them attempting to keep Diggs or mollify Diggs. But no, I think that they will try to run the ball. I don't think it's going to be that great, as we kind of discussed with so if Matt's right and those linebacker injuries are just such a huge problem that they can't overcome the fact that they've got these 3 run pluggers up front, maybe running the ball is going to be pretty effective. Like I mentioned, the Giants are league average in terms of expected points given up against the run. But this is the worst or the 31st or 31st in adjusted net yards per attempt pass defense in the league. So they should throw it. And I feel like they're not going to throw it that much. I would be a little surprised if they threw it over 35 times. I would very much appreciate them throwing it over. And I feel like you don't have to have Mahomes or Jackson to throw it like 60 times in a win if you're winning by like 30. I think that it would make sense to make a statement to the league and to Diggs and to Cousins that you have confidence in them to throw the ball a lot, but I just don't think that they'll do it. I'd like to be wrong about that too.
So sort of like walking up to the biggest guy in prison and punching him right in the face, like making sure the whole yard sees you do it.
Yeah, but because you're doing it against the Giants, it's more like the Ender's Game version of that, or Ender's Shadow version of that, walking up to the biggest guy in prison and punching the person next to him.
I was just eating my tapioca pudding. What the hell, guy?
Never look at me like that again. What? I wasn't even... Shut up.
Would Arif like to dismiss any other concerns this week? The last two, Kirk being terrible and Diggs' situation, both blew up pretty much immediately after. Do you want to just declare the Vikings are never going to win a Super Bowl so we can get this off our back?
Yeah. Oh, God. So after the Green Bay game, I said Kirk Cousins had the worst game of his career. He's never going to play like that again. He obviously has a bad game against Chicago, but I think he had a better game against Chicago than he did against Green Bay. So
instead of an F minus, it was an F plus. It was ugly.
Yeah. So technically, that kind of, I got what I wished for in I've already used a monkey paw reference on Twitter already this week, so I can't dig into it too much. But it's that. The Diggs thing.
Why do you even have that cursed amulet?
It was just so nice to be able to wish for stuff. Just idea of it. The Diggs thing, I'm still not wrong, because what I said was that the rumors didn't make any sense, and they still don't. They're bad rumors from people who just make stuff up. But the thing is, they capitalized on a thing that we knew to be the case, that Diggs is frustrated. And so they just kind of built it from there. But, they said Diggs requested a trade. To the best of our knowledge, he hasn't. They said that the Patriots were working out a trade with the Vikings. No, they haven't been. They said that the trade was going to be finalized soon. Obviously not. So, I was technically right about both of those things. And I'm sure that makes everyone feel a lot better.
Well, as long as you're being technically right and the brand is strong, I suppose that's all that really matters about Norse Code. Beef asks the question, I'm going to get a jersey and want to go with a lesser-known player. Which one will be the least embarrassing to wear in a decade? Mateafa, Ham, or O'Neal? I don't want to repeat the Nishioka mistake of 2011. Go Ham. Go Ham all day, every day.
He's
getting targets.
He's getting targets. So I assume this is buying a Kleinsasser jersey, or I bought an Antoine Winfield jersey. But I think it's Brian O'Neal. He's playing really well. And no one's mad at him. So my concern with buying a CJ Ham jersey, because I think wearing something that says Ham 30 on it fantastic. Like, that's just great.
Yep, sure is.
The problem is I think they will get rid of him. Like, they sign these fullbacks to like 3-year contracts, get a fullback onto the practice squad, get rid of that full, no matter who it is. Jerome Felton, gone. Zach Line, gone. I think the next one's going to be CJ Ham, and then they're going to have Kari Blossingham compete against like some converted quarterback or something in camp to be the next fullback. So that's the concern, is that you're getting a jersey of somebody who's only going to be on the team for this year. Maybe.
Or you
Blessingham's on the practice squad. How many fullbacks are on a practice squad?
Or you can just sit back, buy the Ham jersey, and just have it as a reminder of when we were all living in the golden age of Ham.
I mean, you could do that. You're probably not going to be in a situation where Ham is batting like 126 or whatever. Like, the reason he's gone from the team is irrelevant to the fact that you're wearing a jersey in all likelihood. So the upside is not high, but the downside is not low. I get it. But I would personally go with Brian O'Neill. Plus, you get to be a nerd about, I really watched the game, and if you just take a look at the tape, Brian O'Neill's been playing really excellently. Like, you could just say that. Who's going to disagree with you?
I'm just saying that once the player leaves the team, that O'Neill could mean anything, but Ham means Ham. Like, people will recognize the Ham situation.
That's okay. That's fair. That's a good argument.
Mick asks, everyone talks about the window of the defense. With these undrafted free agent players becoming quality starters, is the defense really the window we should be concerned about? Would it not make more sense to worry about only having high-quality Diggs, Thielen, Cook for 3 or more years?
That's interesting, because we've seen really good performances from Anthony Harris to replace Andrews and Dale. We've seen really good performances from Eric Wilson in replacement of either Anthony Barr or Eric Kendricks. And he played a lot better this year, especially against the run, which is a weakness. We've seen obviously high performances from Holton Hill. And then also they have Mike Hughes under contract for a while. So that's an interesting question. Plus, they also, at defensive tackle, have Jaleel Johnson at nose to potentially replace Linval. And I was worried about Johnson, but I think he's looked a little bit better since the beginning of this year. Plus, they've got Armin Watts, who is, I think, a really fantastic nose prospect. And then they've got a couple of bodies at 3 technique. Plus, they've got a reasonable amount of depth at defensive end with Afadi and Stephen Weatherly. So, really reasonable question. And a lot of those guys are undrafted, plus that first-round pick. I'd still be worried. Harrison Smith is gone. That defense changes really dramatically.
Yeah.
Linval Joseph is gone. It changes, maybe not as dramatically, but it changes pretty substantially. Xavier Rhodes is already beginning to age out. We know what that looks like. That looks pretty, he's off the field every couple of snaps, right? Like, we know what that looks like. It looks pretty bad. So, I'd be worried about that. The secret concern, I guess, or the concern that's maybe underrated with regards to age, is Adam Thielen. Everyone thinks of him as a young guy, or I shouldn't say thinks of him as a young guy, but begins to presume that he's young because he broke out pretty recently. But he's a 4-year player in college, and he spent a year on the practice squad, and oh my God, he's already 29. Hey man, that's as old as some of these defenders that you're worried about. That's a concern. They should draft a receiver right away or something, at least in the second round after they draft a quarterback. So yeah.
Not wrong.
I mean, so I just did a mock draft, or not a mock draftable, the Draft Network's draft simulator, just as kind of a joke, last week before the Bears game. And Justin Herbert fell from 2 to wherever the Vikings were picking, 19, I think, in the simulator. And I just had to pick him. So and then I picked Tyler Johnson, wide receiver from Minnesota. So those are the 2 players in that draft I recognized, and I picked them. There you go.
Well, I'm glad that you're paid to pay attention to college football, right?
I had no idea who the rest of those people were.
Yeah. Kyle Slaby says, compare this season in the Zimmer era to a season of The Simpsons. Have we reached zombie Zimmer status? Can you compare the signing of Cousins to the Principal and the Pauper episode, posited by some as the harbinger of things to come for the series?
The Principal and the Pauper, was that the one where he designed the car?
No. Principal and the Pauper, I believe, and I'm actually just looking this up right now. I believe that was the episode where he was.
Oh, God,
where
that
the
episode
name
sucked. Yes. Holy crap. Oh, my God. Sorry, I just remembered.
Yep. Season 9, episode 2, Principal and the Pauper is the episode where we find out Principal Skinner's real name. And they, like, retcon him for most of the series.
Insane that they made that decision. We don't need to go into Simpsons history. Besides, you'll outclass me very quickly.
Well, I mean, I happen to think that the worst episode in those early seasons happens to be the one where all of the smart people in Springfield get into some fight over whether or not they can have access to a gazebo, and I think that's dumb as hell. And I think that was right around the time that I was like, I don't know if I want to keep watching this because this is dumb. We are no longer in the golden age of The Simpsons after that.
I think the sharp realization for me, so like I knew the Simpsons were in decline. The sharp realization for me was a very modernish episode. They did one on the Patriot Act. I don't know if you remember this, but like it's just like a run of the mill Simpsons episode that like in the middle of like season 22 or whatever, right? Slickly produced, great animation, right? Normal for the episodes at that time. And it was a Patriot Act episode. I don't think I laughed once. And I watched the whole thing and I'm like, what am I doing here?
Yeah, that's rough.
There's a bunch of great YouTube videos on the decline of The Simpsons, and I genuinely mean it. Remember, I'm a YouTube hack. Mm-hmm. About why The Simpsons declined, how we know it's declined, and like a breakdown of that kind of stuff. And like really good breakdowns on the joke structure of mid or early Simpsons, like season 4 to season 7 and stuff, and the joke structure of current Simpsons and how they're different and why, the jokes don't fall, in quite the same way. I'll link them in the show notes. They're great. But to compare the Vikings to a season of The Simpsons, that's honestly pretty difficult, especially because, again, I'm not as well-versed as you or Dusty, who's a fanatic. But we'd have to pick a season where it had a bunch of weird highs and lows. But we don't I don't know how this season ends, so I don't know how the Simpsons season. Like what season did you think there was just a bunch of just rock bottom episodes, but also some pretty solid ones?
If I had to pick something like that, it might be it's something between season 10 and season 11, because season 11. Amongst other things, had the death of Maude, and that just felt so weird.
Yeah,
like really,
yeah.
I don't know how I feel about that one exactly. It also had the weird Christmas episode that had what was his name? The short, I say the midget, but Gary Coleman was like randomly in an episode of The Simpsons. You're like, really? That's what we're doing? But it also had like, I don't know. It's okay. But season 10 had The Wizard of Evergreen Terrace, which is fantastic.
Right.
I don't know if I can do season 10. Ugh, it's hard. Somewhere between, and it can't be season 9 because that has the Last Temptation of Crust. And that's fantastic. Okay. Yeah, it's probably season 10, and things are weird, and like, because there's a couple of like decent moments in that one, like the Tokyo episode is in that one.
I love the Tokyo episode.
And you're like, oh my God, that's so funny. And then there's just crap.
Well, that based off of the parameters I gave you, that seems pretty reasonable.
I think that one had the Bible story episode one too.
That was kind of all right.
It was okay. Next question is from Ryan, who asks, is the internet ready for Matty Matheson's own YouTube channel?
Absolutely not. So I didn't know that it was his own, like YouTube just served me that recommendation, right? And I watched it, and it was so much yelling, and I didn't have my headphones in, and I was like, "Wow, the neighbors better be okay with this."
But it was watered down. It was my complaint. Like, it wasn't even Maddie Matheson at his like purest. It had clearly been cut with like something to extend the high. Like, it wasn't.
Right. Well, okay. So
there were there's nothing
really
about blowjobs and nothing about his mother-in-law. These are staples of.
He's still got a couple of the drug references, including one early, so you knew it was a Maddie Matheson video. But it's weird, right? Because like he is not with Munchies or Vice, right? Which is where the older ones were, and so he doesn't have like not that Munchies is going to tell him to do whatever anyway, but like there's no corporate branding thing. It's his channel now. So like, why would you hold back? I don't know. But maybe he just wasn't feeling it that day. Maybe he was just really into pho. So he didn't really need to swear that much.
Yeah, that much. I'm Maddie Matheson, and today it's time. We're gonna do pho. It's pho, not pho. And then let's talk about how he was underfed and addicted to substances.
Right.
And was saved one day by a magic.
Pho saved his life. Yeah. A 24-hour bone broth.
Well, you gotta boil that stuff for 24 hours. It's important. Don from Ohio asks, really? I do not have a conjoined twin, Don. I'm not even going to go into that. Just because I may need surgery on my hand because of something stupid I did. No. Also, I'm cooking chili for a potluck for work. It's being made in a slow cooker. Don't know why you're telling me that aspect, but okay. My question for all of you is, should I bring cheese, sour cream, and crackers as toppings, or do you recommend something else? Feeding 30. I feel like if you are making it spicy, that you should bring sour cream. Totally okay with the cheese. I wouldn't do crackers though. I do chips for some reason. Like, you can actually just turn the chili into a bit of a dip if you end up having the chips with it instead.
Yeah, I mean,
crackers just seems excessive. I feel like it's more of a festive thing to have chips.
Honestly, I would bring all three. Like, yeah, so the crackers, I don't always love it in chili, but sometimes I do. I understand the chips because you can basically turn it into nachos, like you said, like dip. But I mean, I don't know, especially in the Midwest, I think people just expect crackers. But I mean, honestly, if you just brought chili and nothing, people would be pretty happy. You bring chili and cheese, people will be very happy. You add sour cream, they'll be extremely happy. In each addition doesn't take that much effort or money. And the crackers, I think, just add to it. But that's the thing I would boot if I was going to make a decision. But I mean, honestly, I would bring all three.
See, and every work environment potluck I've ever been in is more of like a little bit of this, little bit of that. And if you were getting a full bowl of it, then, by all means, the crackers. But it's much more about like a little bit of this here. And that's why
that's a good point, too.
I feel like as a veteran of many a potluck, let me tell you about something about The Office. You spill it everywhere on the floor. No, I think, well, in my situation, I would be bringing chips. But since Don doesn't seem to give a damn what I think and is more concerned about me potentially having something evil growing in my hand, I can't even explain how weird it is to get an ultrasound on your hand as they're trying to figure out whether or not they need to give you surgery. So I tweeted it out earlier today. And I was like, the lab tech just gave my hand an ultrasound. And if I find out what the gender is going to be, I'm going to be really pissed off because this is not a part of my birth plan, damn it. And then Dawn decides that I clearly am giving birth. So I'm just kind of... this is why I should just not share with anybody.
Never tweet.
No, never tweet. Just get off the podcast, make Dusty pull his weight, that sort of thing. That is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. That got dark. To be fair, Dusty was going to be on again and had to cancel due to, I'm going to say, morale of the restaurant. Restaurant's doing fine. But if you would like to plug something, Arif, now I believe would be the appropriate time to do so.
Yeah, I don't actually have a new article coming out. We
Lazy
kiboshed
bastard.
we kiboshed the article I had planned, which luckily I hadn't put too much effort into it. I just produced a couple of videos and I hadn't written anything yet. But we kiboshed the idea for the article after the Diggs stuff came out today. We were just like, yeah, this would just fall flat. It'd be like ignoring that there's something happening.
What the hell was it about? Was it about the top 5 happiest moments of by Stephon Diggs, or like?
No, it was an article I was super not enthused about anyway. And now that I'm going to describe it, people are like, Arif, write the artitle. Sorry, it's not going to happen, even if you like it. The work I've done will appear later on in the season. Yeah, no, it was going to be kind of a follow up to the Green Bay thing I did, where I demonstrated that Diggs was kind of always open, and so I was just going to be like, oh, Diggs and Thielen were open all Chicago. What happens when Kirk finds them and connects to them on deep passes? What does it look like? Why is it different when Kirk isn't throwing them the ball on deep passes in Chicago? I was going to do a comparison and maybe find a way to like, I don't know, fix Cousins. In terms of what we were seeing. But it just would have been weird in the context of Diggs, like not holding out, but like not showing up to practice and being like, oh yeah, by the way, Diggs was open a lot. And you're like, well, yeah, that was we know. Right. So
be like, as it turns out, he's very aware of that too.
Right. Like, good job.
All right. Well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Look out for us next week when we review, hopefully, the victory over the Giants. If it's anything like the first 4 weeks of the year, I am expecting us to jump ahead to like a 21-0 lead, 28-0 lead by the, let's say, middle of the first quarter. So, looking forward to that. If you enjoy the show and if you hear value in what we produce, please go to patreon.com/norsecode or paypal.me/norsecode and toss us a buck or two, and we'll appreciate that. Helps keep the show ad-free, that sort of thing. But for Arif, for Dusty, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and please remember that revenge is a dish best served funky as hell. And we will see you next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/norsecode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/norsecode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.